Real families, real farms, real food. Welcome to Arizona Agriculture Connection with Maricopa County Farm Bureau. My name is Nicole Clements, Executive Director, and I'll be your host. Maricopa County Farm Bureau is the voice of agriculture in a community that thrives on the dichotomy of urban and rural agriculture operations. This podcast is a home for farmers, ranchers, food lovers, prospective agriculturalists, and those looking to connect the food on their plate with the farm that it came from. As we take an inside look at agriculture in Arizona, we will delve into topics like ag technology, policy, food preparation, and everything in between. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform with new episodes every Wednesday. Arizona Agriculture Connection is hosted by Maricopa County Farm Bureau and sponsored by Paloma Ready Mix and Materials, a proud supporter of agriculture and our communities. Be sure to subscribe and share your favorite episodes with your friends. For more interactions, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Maricopa County FB. Now let's discover some Arizona agriculture. Welcome back, Arizona Aggies, to another episode of Arizona Agriculture Connection. We are back today with our friend Katie Aikens, Director of Education at Arizona Farm Bureau. And what are we getting into today? GMOs. One of the hottest topics of conversation on any sort of platform, on any social media. You see people having conversations about GMOs. Whether they are right, wrong, or indifferent, we're here to educate and inform and let you know all about GMOs. So let's kick it off easy. What is the definition of a GMO?
So it's such a loose thing, but if you're looking at the G and the M and the O, it's a genetically modified organism.
And does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm going to become genetically modified if I eat it?
Well, I mean, technically you are a GMO, right? Because when we look at that broad definition of what GMO stands for, that's anything that has been genetically modified from parents. So you have a mom and a dad, you're a genetic modification of them, right? Anything that we consume is a genetic modification. You look at corn, for an example. The corn that is eaten today, that is eaten 100 years ago, is far different than the original maize from thousands of years ago. And those genetic modifications came from cross-pollination, genetic selection, right? You go all the way back to Mendel when he was breeding the peas, and that's where we kind of figured out, like, oh, this particular plant has a trait that I like, right? It grows bigger, it produces more. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross-pollinate that with this other plant that has this other desired trait that I want, has broader leaves, and I'm going to cross-pollinate them, and hopefully that outcome, the hybrid that we get, the GMO, is something that is beneficial, right? And so we've been breeding for GMOs, for desired traits, for hundreds of years. But really, when consumers are talking about GMOs, of course, that's not what they're referring to. They're talking more about things, maybe a word you've heard is transgenic organisms. And so that means that instead of through cross-pollination or it happening just in nature with the plants outside together, we are taking a gene or multiple genes from one organism and scientifically putting it into the DNA of something else. And so that's what we call transgenic. And that's really what the discussion revolves around when we're talking about GMOs with consumers or a lot of things on social media and the internet. So transgenic organisms, probably more than GMOs.
So even though it's a little scary to think about, what is the safety behind it? Can we just go out and create GMOs for anything, or how does it get into our food supply? What is the approval process? What does that look like? And how do we know that even if it is a GMO product, that it's still safe for us to consume?
That's a great question. And I think that's one that a lot of people have. And the information is out there, but not a lot of people know, which is always interesting when I'm having these conversations. So I think the first thing to recognize is that on average, it takes 13 years and about $130 million in research and safety testing before a GMO or transgenic organism can become available on the marketplace. And it's not just like, 13 years passed and here's my $130 million. Yay, it's ready to go. right? There have to be approval from different organizations. So, of course, we have the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, we have the USDA, and we also have the EPA, because we want to make sure that these transgenic organisms, these GMOs that are coming to the marketplace, that they are not going to harm people or animals that consume them, insects that are pollinating them, or the environment around them, the soil, right? And so it's those three governing agencies, bodies that mark approval. And before it even gets to that approval process, there are years and years of experimental trials and data that is collected. And so that's one of the things that I think most people are worried about is the safety of GMOs, but that is probably where the most documentation is found, is on the safety of these. We have been consuming transgenic organisms for over 30 years, and there has been no documented proof of any diseases, sicknesses, injuries because that particular item was transgenic. In fact, when you look at all the research, it shows for food safety and also nutrition that those transgenic organisms, those GMOs, are indistinguishable from their non-GMO counterparts. So they're essentially the same, except for when we want them to be different, because there are actually a couple transgenic organisms that have higher nutritional value than some of the others. So there's that.
Well, that's fun. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that, so, okay, we're, significant number of years in, a lot of money invested. That's a big number, right? 130 million. So what I think maybe when we think about as we're investing this money, is it worth it? What is the point? What is the advantage of getting these approved? What is the advantage of having these in our food cycle?
I think that's twofold, right? Because there are some traits that are beneficial to the farmers, to the people who are producing the food. And then there are some that are directly targeting the consumers, right? And we might see the value in them more than, because we're so far removed from the farm, we don't know what impact it has on farmers. We're like, well, what does that do for me, GMO corn? Like, how is that impacting me? I don't really see any significant impact. Where when you see maybe an apple that doesn't brown, so I can have a sliced apple and I don't have to eat it in 5 seconds and it's still going to be a pretty apple color, to me, that's pretty exciting, right? And so I think people really need to dive into the benefits of GMOs, and it's on a personal level what it is that's going to speak to them. When we're looking at the benefits to our farmers, it's going to be, we have crops that are now drought tolerant, but more specific, herbicide tolerant, pest resistant, which is huge, and then disease resistance, which we as consumers might not look at the disease resistance, the papaya. A lot of people eat papaya, right? So a lot of our papaya is coming from Hawaii. And in fact, a handful of years ago, well, not a handful now, I think it was like 2005, so it's been a while, there was problems with the papaya in Hawaii, the papaya ring spot virus specifically, and it was wiping out the production of papaya altogether. So the farmers were struggling, right? Their livelihood is to grow the papaya. People also like to eat the papaya, so this one might be twofold. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to burn the trees that were infected so that the infection doesn't spread to the other trees. We're going to use insecticides so that we can wipe out the pests that are carrying it from tree to tree. Those things didn't work. So then they go, okay, fine. We're just going to move it to a completely different island. We're just going to cross the big body of water and see if that'll stop it. And it didn't. And so they were on the verge of the papaya industry in Hawaii being eliminated. And so they were able to turn to biotechnology, which had started being implemented and used and sort of discovered in plants back in the late 1960s. So it's nothing really new. And there were other crops that they had used this science on. And so what they were able to do was actually take a protein from the virus itself and insert it into the papaya's DNA. And the papaya was now resistant to the ring spot virus. So we have what we call the rainbow papaya, and it is the GMO papaya that comes from Hawaii, and it saved the industry there in Hawaii and, of course, produces all those papayas for us to eat. Now, when I get into the science of it, right, because that's what freaks people out, like, oh my gosh, you're doing this. Well, think about the flu shot. It's essentially what's happening to us when we get a flu shot or something to that nature, right? We are then ourselves having resistance to that particular virus. Cool thing with the papayas, though, they don't have to like get vaccines or that sort of thing. They genetically modified 7 papaya plants, and the offspring produced that genetic trait. So it was just introduced to those original plants, and they've never had to do anything to it again because it naturally goes from generation to generation.
That's fantastic. Cool. Yeah, that's so interesting. I never knew any of that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't like papaya, but do you like pineapple?
Okay, so this is my favorite GMO. If you have a favorite, let me know. But this is my favorite GMO because I actually do not like pineapple. I just have never really cared for it. But you know what I do love is the pink glow pineapple. It is so good. And it still has a pineapple flavor, so I'm not really sure why I like it so much more. For some reason, I love that pineapple. Okay. And so it's my favorite GMO.
Okay. And that, of course, comes to us from Costa Rica. Yes. So it has higher levels of lycopene, just like in tomatoes and other things, which is what gives us that color, which is pretty cool, and has been known to have some health benefits. So it's not just to make a pretty pink pineapple, but...
So I'm benefiting my health with my pink pineapple addiction. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but they keep the tops from them. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? And they are kind of regenerative growing them.
Yes, and so they don't sell those pineapples. If you get the pink glow, I was at the grocery store the other day, the tops are cut off. And that's because they don't want people to cut them off and then plant them here, right? And that, I think, is actually where some of people's hesitancy with things come from, because that's patented, right? And they don't want you to cut off the tops and plant your own here. And that's really just, if you think about it, sometimes that turns people off. But I think we have to think about why they patent these things. Because on average, it takes $130 million in research and development. And think about all of the things that they maybe started trying to develop, and through testing or whatever, it didn't work. It didn't meet the requirements. And they had all of that investment in the science and the manpower, the scientists for those too. And they have to find a way to recoup some of that. So they are patented, but just for a period of time. And then, other companies can do exactly the same thing. But that's sort of the history a little bit behind why they patent, but that's why there's no tops on the pink glow pineapples. But if people do want to grow something at home, a transgenic GMO in their home garden, one of the newest ones it's from 2003, but kind of just sold in 2024 and 2025, is the purple tomato. So this is sold as seeds for home gardeners to grow. And the cool thing about the purple tomato is it came from a company called Norfolk Healthy Produce. So it has genes from a snapdragon in it, which is what produces that purple color, which gives us a health benefit, which is kind of cool, right? So think blueberries and blackberries and the antioxidants and the health benefits from those. That has now been given to this particular variety of tomato. So it's called the purple tomato, small little purple tomatoes. And unlike some of the other purples, if we have home gardeners, they love their heirloom tomatoes specifically. And so if you look at like the black crumb and some of those, they're like, well, those are purple. But when you cut into them, they're not really purple inside. That purple is only skin deep. The purple tomato, it's through the entire tomato. So when you cut that tomato open, it is purple through and through. So the levels of those antioxidants are even higher than the others. And you might be thinking, well, like, why did they pick a tomato? Why can't people just eat blueberries and blackberries and that sort of thing? Well, of course, they looked at the research. And they found that the tomato is the second most eaten vegetable. So I know, and you're looking at me because you know that all the time. I'm teaching children that tomatoes are a fruit because they have seeds and not a vegetable. I can only win so many battles. And so they're calling it the most consumed vegetable. And I'm going to let that one go for right now. I guess maybe let's do a little back and forth. I'm going to take control of this for just a second, okay? Because I know the consumers now, they're like, okay, well, you're talking about GMOs, and I've heard you say now a pink pineapple, and I heard corn in there, and I heard a purple tomato and a papaya. But, like, what are the actual GMOs? So I think for fun, I'm going to say a consumer-facing product, and you're going to tell me if it is a transgenic organism. Okay? Is it grown? Is it a transgenic organism? Okay? So we're going to start off easy. Pop quiz. Here we go. Let's go with field corn. So that's like the corn that we grow for, it's used for high fructose corn syrup. It's used for feed corn for our animals. Is that a transgenic?
Yes.
It is. Very good. And that can be for herbicide tolerance. Okay, how about let's do another one that's consumers would know. We don't produce here in Arizona, but consumers still know it. How about soybeans?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So along the same lines as our corn, the transgenic traits that they've been given, or the traits they've been given through transgenesis, is really beneficial to the farmer, right? Not necessarily nutritional value to the consumers. How about grapes?
Yes. No.
They
No,
are
because
not.
that's like a crossbred grape.
Yeah, so those could be hybrids, right? Through traditional breeding methods. So a lot of the things that we consume, people think those cotton candy grapes, they're like, oh yeah, 100%. Or broccolini, the broccoli flower. Nope, those are hybrids. Those are not transgenics, okay? So a lot of things can be accomplished through traditional breeding, cross-pollination, that sort of thing. Let's go with something that consumers don't eat directly, but a lot of things that we consume does require this. Okay. Alfalfa. Is alfalfa a GMO? Blink twice for yes.
Yes.
Yes. Alfalfa is a GMO. Alfalfa is one. Okay, so here's a little thing to set you up for success. There are about a dozen that are going to be yes. Okay, so alfalfa, yes, that's super important. How about let's do another one that I think consumers we know a lot about because we wear it. Cotton, is it a GMO? Transgenic.
Yes. Yes.
It is. It is. And this is probably one of the success stories that I talk about the most when I'm in schools or talking with consumers. And you saw me, I got excited. I sat up in my chair a little bit, right? I'm sure my voice went up a little bit too. But so one of the transgenic traits for the cotton is something we call Bt cotton, right? So it's the same bacterium that organic farmers use as a pesticide, right? Because of course, organic, they can use pesticides, just natural pesticides. So it's the same thing that's used in organic food production. So they took this Bt bacterium and they inserted it essentially into the DNA of the cotton. So now the cotton is resistant or kills the cotton bollworm, which was a big problem, not only here in Arizona, but in other parts of the country and the world. And so one of the tools that they used to help eradicate the bollworm, which it is here in Arizona, which is so cool, was biotechnology. So we have Bt cotton. So essentially now, if the bollworm was here and started to eat on that boll, which would negatively impact the yields of the crops, the production, that bollworm would die. Okay, which is pretty cool. There's an enzyme within that Bt that negatively impacts an enzyme in the gut of that bollworm, and so the bollworm dies. We don't go eat like a cotton boll. That's not something we do. But even if we did, we don't have that enzyme in our stomach, so it is not going to negatively impact us. But you're not going to eat a cotton boll anyways. But if you were to eat something with cottonseed oil, it would not have a negative impact on you. But as I said, that was just one tool in the toolbox for farmers who were battling the boll weevil, right? So they were able to create this transgenic BT cotton. And so some farmers who were maybe spraying like 5, 6 times throughout the season of cotton for the bollworm, when BT cotton came, they could go down to 0. We had some that went all the way to 0 sprays of pesticides. Let that sink in on the benefit of that, right? But as I said, it's just a tool in the toolbox. And I think that's something important for us as consumers to look at is things that farmers are doing. It's never just like, oh, yeah, we're going to do this and it solves all of our problem. This is the only thing we're looking at. When we're looking at the cotton specifically, it's not only that they're using BT cotton that helped us eradicate, but now they have deadlines for when that cotton has to be harvested and turned over so that it's not there in the soil. It disrupts the life cycle and the timeline of that life cycle. And so there are very specific dates that farmers have to have that turned over in now. So as of right now, the bollworm is still eradicated in Arizona, but it is found in other places. So they continue to monitor that. But BT cotton was just one of those things that allowed 5 to 6 sprayings of pesticide down to 0 for some of our farmers for that bollworm. So very, very cool. Okay, let's get back to things that people will eat. Strawberries.
No.
That's correct. No strawberries. Let's talk about, I've been getting some big blackberries lately. How about blackberries?
No.
No. How about apples?
Yes.
Yeah, if they were listening at the beginning, I kind of said the apple, right? But it's a very specific apple. Have you heard of the Arctic apple? Yes. Yeah, so for the consumers who are listening, the trade name for it is the Arctic apple. You can get them in 4 different varieties. It's the Granny, the Gala, the Fuji, and the Honey Crisp is what they were getting ready for approval. But those aren't going to be the big shiny apples you see in the grocery store. The Arctic apple was developed to 2 reasons. One, to promote snacking of nutritional foods, and 2, to help eliminate food waste. Because there are literally millions of pounds of apples that are thrown away every single year, grown and thrown away because they got bruised or damaged in shipping, or they couldn't sell them. They go to waste. Or like when I cut them open for my kids with that really cool apple slicer. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. I love that thing, the sound. Anyway, slice those. When you have little kids, you know, they're not eating that apple in one sitting, just focused. They're eating it during playtime. And so it might take them 20 minutes to come back for another slice, and that apple is starting to brown. So they're like, I don't want that apple, Mommy. And so it gets thrown away, right? So the Arctic apple is what we consider a non-browning apple. So through the amazing scientists of the world who are studying DNA, they were able to find what it was in the apple that caused the browning. And so there's actually, I think there's 6 genes within the apple that can create that browning when it comes into contact with oxygen. So if you slice it or you bite it, that sort of thing. And so they actually inserted another apple gene into the apple, which silenced some of those PPO producing genes. So it browns 35% slower than normal apples, which is cool, right? Gives you a little opportunity to eat it without browning. So with that being said, though, they're not the big shiny apples we see at the store. They're only sold as pre-sliced apples, like in the little bags that you can get from fast food places, those sorts of things, or the grocery store for those snacking apples, or as dried fruit. But it'll have that name, that Arctic apple, on it, regardless of what the variety of apple is. So that's kind of a fun one. Let's go with a potato.
Yes.
Yes, it is, right? So very similar to the Arctic apple, which is a non-browning apple. We have the non-browning potato, which is pretty cool. It's called the innate potato. Not really sold in the grocery store, more used in the restaurant industry and food service industry. And that's because it resists the black spots. And of course, if you've ever gotten a potato, there's nothing wrong with the black spot, but people don't want to eat the black spot. Those of you who've only ever gotten a potato at a restaurant, you've never seen the black spot because they cut that out and throw that away. But now maybe they're serving the innate potato, so it resists those black spots anyway. So kind of another cool one. How about sugar beets?
Yes.
Yeah, sugar beets and sugar cane. Not obviously sugar cane, not in the United States, but sugar beet in the United States. How about squash?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a very specific summer squash. So it's not all squash. It falls in the zucchini realm, but it's just a one summer squash. We already talked about the purple tomato, but it's important to know that outside of the purple tomato, no other tomato is biotech currently. The tomato was one of the first biotech consumer-facing foods back in about 1996, but it didn't last very long. It was the flavor saver tomato, but it didn't have a good consumer response, and not because there was a lot of discussion about biotechnology at the time. It's just the variety of tomato that they chose to stick the gene in wasn't the best variety for consumers. So that one kind of went away. So since 1996, we haven't had a GMO tomato until just this last year. So that surprises a lot of people. How about watermelon?
Yes.
No, the seedless watermelon is accomplished through just regular breeding, right? And the varieties that they use and how many males versus female and the number of line that it is in the watermelon. I always have to go to our watermelon experts because I am not a scientist. I'll be the first to say that. But our watermelon is not transgenic, not GMO. Give me one that maybe consumers might think, or you've heard people be like, I don't eat that because it's a GMO. Or
What about wheat?
So wheat is not. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's one that probably gets a lot of discussion online. And that's just because it seems like more and more people are having intolerances to gluten, which is found in just wheat, barley, and rye. And it's usually wheat that gets attacked online for people who might have those gluten intolerances. Currently, there is no transgenic wheat available on the marketplace, but you want to know something cool?
Yes.
So in trial right now, they are developing a wheat using biotechnology that removes 85% of what creates that allergen for people. So it would almost be, you can't call it a gluten-free wheat, but it almost is. And so people who have celiac disease maybe couldn't eat it, right? Because theirs is so severe, but maybe just those individuals that have a gluten intolerance, that would be a wheat that they could still get the good bread, right? Using the delicious wheat, but it wouldn't have that allergen response to those consuming it. So currently not available anywhere, but biotechnology could be used as sort of an avenue to solve a problem. And that's what biotechnology is being used for a lot now. Yes, in theory, we can just say, hey, I want to do this. And I guess a scientist could create something, but it has to go through all of these paths to make sure it's safe before it makes it to consumers. But the things that are being produced for a reason, right? And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Especially you'll see a lot of conversations revolving around, well, I traveled to Europe and I felt 100 times better than I do. And I think there's a lot of different things that can contribute to that. I was in Europe last fall and yeah, I felt amazing, but I was also walking 30,000 steps a day.
I was just talking to somebody who said that, and they were like, we went to Europe and we walked 8 miles a day. And it's, well, because you may be in vacation mode, right? And so you're up and you're moving and maybe you're not sitting down eating those big heavy meals all at once. You're eating lighter meals throughout the day. I think that also comes into play when people just change their diets in general. I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, I eliminated this from my diet and I just feel amazing. And is it the GMO component, or is it just that you removed a lot of processed foods from your diet and so you're eating more whole foods, fresh fruits and vegetables, and then the proteins, the chickens, the meats, right? But staying away from some of the processed foods, maybe that's why you're feeling better. And so I think that as consumers, that's just something we've got to give thought to. I think it's easy for us to blame one thing as the culprit for us not feeling good when we're eating or for whatever the reason is. But I think there's a lot of things that play into that. And one of the things I hear about Europe, I'm glad that you brought that up, is like, well, Europe bans GMOs, so they definitely must be something wrong with them or bad with them. But that is kind of another misconception out there. The European Union does not ban GMOs. In fact, some of the GMOs have come from the scientists from the European Union. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about that as well.
They also import a lot of specifically wheat from the United States, which I think a lot of people don't know, which is kind of a fun fact. So yeah, it's always just very interesting. I think when you look at, you're always going to feel better eating whole foods, right? But we're in an age of convenience because everybody's extremely busy. And, it kind of started that TV dinner era. Oh, yeah. And I can't think of anything worse, to be honest.
I'm still, with my family, I have almost two teenage kids, but one teenager and one getting close. And if I can't from start to finish make it and be sitting down and eating in 30 minutes, it doesn't happen at our house because we're running from one thing to the other, just like so many people.
Yeah. And so it's tough to, cook a whole meal from scratch every night when you only have 30 minutes. Maybe you only have 10 minutes some nights. And maybe you don't even have that. You just got to grab something on the way out the door. So it's just finding that balance that works for you and your family. And, that's kind of the whole point of like episodes like this, is to try to help people understand what they can and can't and are comfortable with purchasing and nourishing their families with. So
I think the important thing, when talking about GMOs specifically, is know that there are regulations for them and they are being monitored, and science continues to follow since they have been produced. And again, it's not showing any negative impacts on human health from consuming GMOs versus non-GMOs. So, I think everybody can feel okay about eating what works for them. You don't have to become an expert on GMOs, but maybe you don't have to be as frightened by some of the marketing strategies of people who are trying to sell their products by telling you that something else is bad for you, because nobody wants to feed their families something that you think is bad for them. And so I think recognizing that marketing sets us up sometimes, right? And because the transgenics, the GMOs, is such a science heavy, the language, the terms they use, how the science works, we're not all scientists, right? And people start using the big words and it sounds scary because they're words we don't understand. But I think just knowing that, they've been around for a really long time. They go through so many tests. In fact, they go through more tests than conventional and organic food does to be able to go to the marketplace. So just know that, the food that you're getting from the grocery store, it's safe. You're doing the best you can, and don't be deterred.
Yeah, I think as someone who has a pretty good general understanding of GMOs, but when you go to the grocery store and you look at the labels, just understanding how much of what is on a label on a product at the grocery store is marketing. Like, I saw a package of beef and it said non-GMO beef.
I saw an oatmeal the other day and it was non-GMO oatmeal, and I'm like, okay, well, oats is not a GMO. And so I really do feel for consumers who have less of an understanding about the agricultural products than even we do, right? We're not experts, but it's really hard when you're like, I don't know what's a GMO, but now this one's telling me it's non-GMO, so the rest of them must be. The oats must have it, right? And it creates a lot of confusion. Yeah. So I think just knowing there's about a dozen GMOs that are out there in the marketplace, and if you have a concern about something, do research on that very specific item. I don't know that I'd ever go to Google and just ask a generic question. If people are looking for information on GMOs, there are a couple of sites that I like to send them as far as consumers that just have questions. They don't want to be told they're good. They don't want to be told they're bad. They just want the information, GMOanswers.com is a great place to go to find out what crops are GMOs, what are the scientists saying, what are the doctors saying, what are the growers saying, and you kind of figure out what is real versus what is marketing. That's a great place that I like to go. And then there's another one if you like nerd out on GMOs after this podcast and you're like, I want to know all of the things and all the things that are coming. I don't know if we have time, but maybe I could tell them a couple of things that are being worked on. It's ISAAA.org, and that stands for International Service for the Acquisition of Ag Biotech Applications. Do you see why that scares people away? Yeah. But I get that every Monday, and it gives me an update of applications that have been filed because there's 70 different countries that are importing, growing, using biotech crops, right? This is not just something that's done here in the United States. It's everywhere. And so this shows us all of the things that are going on, things that are happening in Bangladesh that we might not ever see here. Or for people who are like, well, why haven't you mentioned golden rice yet? Well, okay, we know that's fortified, right, with vitamin A, which is converted beta carotene. And it's very good for nutritional value, like for blindness, right? So for good eyesight, and same if you were to eat carrots, okay? But we don't really have sort of those problems here in the United States because we're eating a more well-balanced diet. We get those nutrients and vitamins from other places. Well, in some third world countries where their main food source is rice, they're not getting those nutrients that they need. And so they're having issues with malnutrition and blindness in children, which is horrible. And so this rice was actually developed 25 years ago. It's been like they've known about it forever, the golden rice. And it was from, interestingly enough, scientists from Europe that developed it. And it's approved, safe and all of those things. And it's being used in some other countries now. And it's being given to those third world countries. It's not being sold, it's being given because they really want to solve the problem, right? But here in the United States, we fight about how it should not be able to be used because we maybe don't see the importance of it because rice isn't as big as a nutritional value for us here. Yeah. So
it's incredibly interesting. And I think I'm a learner myself, so I'll probably be diving into that. Both of those websites will be linked on the blog for this episode on our website, maricopacountyfb.org. I think kind of one point that I just wanted to maybe touch back on is that just because it's different than the normal doesn't mean it's a GMO. So when we talk about the cotton candy grapes and I don't even know what the actual name is, but the white strawberries and things like that, just because it's different.
Yellow cauliflower, purple cauliflower, those are not GMOs.
Romanesco cauliflower, which is just really neat.
That sounds fun to say.
It is.
Love it.
But yeah, just because it's different doesn't mean it's a GMO. And just because it's a GMO doesn't mean it's bad. So
exactly. And I think, some of the talk is now people hear GMOs and maybe transgenic is a new word for some listeners, but maybe they've heard of CRISPR, which is one of the newer gene editing tools that's being used. And that is basically going in and silencing parts of a DNA or reordering or taking DNA from the apple and inserting it into the apple in a specific place, right, to introduce a trait or to stop something negative that's happening. And so CRISPR has been being used a lot. And one thing to know for CRISPR is because there is no sort of outside DNA being introduced, it is not classified as a GMO, right? So it doesn't even have to be identified as a GMO like these other transgenics do. They go through very similar safety protocols, but they don't have to necessarily identify it. So you might see it now more on packages. I'm noticing it's less non-GMO and more of this was made using bioengineered, right? Bioengineered foods, especially in the processed foods. But there are some CRISPR things. So the CRISPR, like the apple, right? Think of the apple. There is coming it's going to save. Do you like chocolate?
Not really.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Okay. The rest of the people listening, they love chocolate,
My chocolate
right?
lovers,
We love chocolate, but there's going to be a CRISPR chocolate. And basically that technology is giving the plant a stronger immune system that can fight diseases that industry is battling. That could jeopardize the chocolate industry, just like the papayas in Hawaii. And if people have heard of citrus greening, that's something that very negatively impacts the citrus industry. They are looking at ways that CRISPR can be used to be able to battle that particular problem. There is, in the US, they've done it, they're researching it, but it's been deregulated by the USDA. So USDA says it's good to go. They're just waiting on the approval from the FDA, and it's a CRISPR mushroom. So it's kind of a non-browning mushroom. Again, it eliminates about 30% of the PPO genes. And then the CRISPR, the wheat that I talked about, that's being done through the CRISPR technology. It is in its trial stage right now. And interestingly enough, in the European Union, right? So again, it's just, I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there, but cool things that are happening. I think before we sign off, we need to talk about a really cool plant that people can get for their houses, because maybe you don't eat some of the foods, or you eat them all and you're like, I just love this so much. How can it impact other parts of my life? You can go ahead and buy the firefly petunia. So the firefly petunia is a bioluminescent petunia. Ooh. What does that mean? It glows in the dark. Now, not enough to like read a book by any means, but you can see the light green glow coming from the plant in the dark. And the neat thing about the petunia is you don't have to feed it like any special fertilizer or food or sit it in a certain place for a certain amount of time. They actually took a gene from a mushroom and inserted it into the petunia, and so it just bioilluminates all by itself. So you can buy them in a 3-pack currently. They're so cute, and you can just grow them in your home if you want to. So that's the firefly petunia. That's kind of like the for fun biotechnology, that, right? Like, why you do that? It's for fun. We view it as fun, but imagine what the scientists are able to garner from research by using the firefly petunia. Already the things that I've been researching and reading is they're able to identify the plant's responses to things in the environment immediately because it glows brighter, it glows less. They can tell things in the certain life stages if something is impacting it negatively, how it's bringing things in and using it in the cells because of this bioluminescence. So I view it as just something really pretty to look at, but 5 years down the road, what is this bioluminescent petunia going to allow scientists to understand about plants in general? So cool, right? So there you go. Firefly petunia, got to do that. There are, a lot of people ask us about animals, biotechnology and animals. So to date, there are only 2 animals that are available on the marketplace that have been bioengineered. And the first one, maybe people have known because it's been around for a while, is the Aqua Advantage salmon. Have you heard of that before?
I have.
Do you eat salmon?
Yes.
Okay, so you probably much appreciated it. Do you know enough about it to tell?
Probably not. Probably not as much as you.
Okay, well, the funny part is I don't eat salmon, but I know a lot about it because I've had to study a lot about biotechnology. And so when people are eating salmon, the typical farmed salmon that you're going to consume is an Atlantic salmon, okay? And so as it was being researched over the years, they found that its hormone regulating gene turned off the production of hormones during the winter months. So it only produced hormones a certain number of months out of the year. And if you're only producing hormones a certain month out of the year, you're also only doing what? Growing. You're only growing, right? So the hormones is what makes animals grow. And so they were like, well, man, could we produce food more efficiently if we ate salmon from a fish that didn't turn off the production of hormones. So it just naturally grew all year long. And so they started doing their research and they found, I'm going to call it a cousin, but it's not really a cousin, right? But it's the Chinook salmon. And they found that its hormone regulating gene never turned off the production of hormones. So with the help of an ocean, I call it a pout, but it's like an eel, right? So with the help of that, a gene from that, they were able to take the gene from the Chinook salmon, insert it into the Atlantic salmon. And so now you had the Atlantic salmon, which people can raise, and it would grow 12 months out of the year. So there were a lot of people who had concerns, like, what if it got out into the wild fish streams? Would it become this invasive salmon? And so they said, okay, well, that's fine. We'll make it sterile. So they were all sterile. So they sterilized it at the egg development. So they were all sterile. So even if they did get out into natural waters, they couldn't reproduce. So it could eliminate at least that hesitation. And then additionally, they grew it all on offshore facilities. So they were produced in Indiana. I don't see an ocean in Indiana. I don't see, anything like that. So that was pretty cool. But again, it was really to be able to produce fish quicker, and not in an unnatural way, because other fish have that gene and was growing year round. It just happened to be, we liked the way that this particular fish tasted, so we wanted this fish to do it. But one of the things to note on that, it was not available to consumers, like for you to go to the grocery store and say, I want the Aqua Advantage salmon from Aqua Bounty. It was more restaurants were using it. But I did see that just this last year, because there's so much sort of discussion about GMOs with consumers and hesitancies, that they just viewed it as not successful, and they sold their one production facility and they closed down the other. That was in Indiana. So the Aqua Advantage salmon is no longer, but I think an important thing to have in case in the future we run into a problem where maybe we need to produce more food because there's more people, more food using less. And the other one, it's a pig, which confuses people, but it's called gal-safe pigs. So I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I'm not super familiar with it, but some folks have basically a disease that when they eat any sort of like red meat or meat, it triggers an allergy. So they just can't consume it. And they say, I guess it's triggered by ticks, if you get bit by a tick. And so this gal-safe pig, they are able to eliminate the alpha-gal sugar on the surface of the cells. And so it's just a product then that those individuals who, maybe had that allergen have the option for this protein. So it's only sold from a couple of farms. It's not ever going to be like wide market because it's not a large part of the population that needs to consume this particular protein. But it's an option for them, which I think is kind of cool. That's, it's what it's about, right? It's about finding ways to produce food that is safe, healthy, nutritious, and also affordable. People have to be able to afford it. So,
absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you for your time today. That was a lot of information in a little bit of amount of time, but I appreciate you taking the time and being with us today. I learned a ton. Hopefully everybody else learned a ton too. One last thing before we go. What is your favorite GMO?
My favorite GMO, well, I guess it would be, don't you hate when you ask a question and it's just long-winded? Just give me the dang answer, would ya? So personally for me to consume, I love the Arctic apples because I like sliced apples. I don't like biting into the big crunchy apple, and I think it's because I have a small mouth. More information than you wanted to know. But I like the sliced apples, so I'm kind of a fan of the Arctic apple myself. But I'm also then a super fan of the biotech crops that benefit our farmers because they're working hard every day to produce that safe, healthy, affordable food, and anything that we can do to get them more tools to be able to do that, I think is going to be my favorite as well.
Absolutely. All right. I love it. Well, let us know your favorite GMO. And for all the links on today's episode, you can find them on our website on the blog for this episode. And catch us next week for another Ag Report edition of Arizona Agriculture Connection. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, Farm Bureau has a place for you. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends on socials. You can also visit our website, maricopacountyfb.org, for more information and to submit a topic you want to learn about. Remember to tune in every Wednesday wherever you listen to podcasts. A huge thank you to Paloma Ready Mix and Materials for supporting our agriculture producers and this podcast. Maricopa County Farm Bureau, bringing you the stories of real families, real farms, and real food. I'm Nicole Clements, signing off. Catch you next week.